Sri Lanka announced default on its entire $51 billion debt on 12th April 2022. What does this mean? And what's next for the country and its 22 million people? In this video, we'll try to understand what's the next step post-default and what led to this crisis. Hello guys, I'm Saurav and welcome to the ARC. Sri Lanka is an island country in the Indian Ocean and is our neighbor in the south. It's famous for its pristine beaches, rich culture and food. Just as the decades of war ended and peace was starting to prevail, the country has been pushed into an unprecedented economic crisis, the biggest since its independence. And most of it is their own doing. People are facing shortage of fuel, food and other essential items. Power cuts have been frequent. Water supply has been disrupted. Prices of commodities have skyrocketed, as the inflation in February this year was recorded at 17.5%. A single egg in Sri Lanka cost 30 Sri Lankan rupees. A kg of sugar 240 rupees. Coconut oil a litre is at 850 rupees. And a kg of milk powder cost 1900 rupees. Colombo CPI rose to 18.7% in March, while food inflation was at over 25%. Shortage of ink and paper has resulted in postponing of exams for millions of students. Multiple deaths have been reported caused due to dehydration, for waiting in line for hours to get fuel and cooking gas cylinders. There are massive protests going on all across the country against the current government, and especially the Rajapaksa brothers. Military has been called to control the chaos. A nationwide public emergency was declared on 1st April to control the protests, but eventually it had to be revoked on 5th April amidst continued protests. Food scarcity, skyrocketing prices of commodities have forced the people to go on the streets, demanding ouster of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, with slogans "Go Gota Go Home Gota" echoing on the streets. The protest this time, however, is unique in a way, considering the strong ethnic divide in Sri Lanka, to find support from people from all walks of life. The anger has been primarily directed at the Rajapaksa family for their years of mismanagement, corruption and for promoting nepotism. The opposition has also upped the ante after 42 members of parliament withdrew their support from the ruling dispensation, making it a minority government in power. Opposition is pushing to bring the no confidence motion against the government. India has extended a $500 million line of credit for fuel and another $2.5 billion for purchase of essential items like food and medicines. But this is not going to solve the crisis. The situation in Sri Lanka remains tense and deeply worrying. But what went wrong? What really has caused this crisis? Sri Lanka depends heavily on imports for food and other essential commodities, for which it needs foreign currency to pay for it, for which it needs foreign currency reserves. But Sri Lanka's foreign currency reserves dipped to $2.31 billion in end of February, down from around $7.7 billion 2 years ago, which is a 70% reduction. It further sunk to an alarmingly low level of $1.93 billion in March. Depleting foreign currency reserves have aggravated the crisis, causing shortage of food, cereals, sugar, medicines, etc. Sri Lanka's fiscal management has not always been very good. Successive governments over the years have taken loans from international agencies and sovereign countries without taking any practical measures to repay the loans. But when exactly did the problem become so grim? Let's take a look at Sri Lanka's economy, how it has performed over the years. If we consider Sri Lanka's GDP growth, it has performed decently after the civil war ended in 2009. But as can be seen on this graphic, post 2012, a sharp decrease in GDP growth can be observed. In 2020, growth became negative because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But the expected economic revival post 2020 did not happen. If we consider the external debt, lackluster GDP performance has affected the debt to GDP ratio. As can be seen in this graphic, Sri Lanka's debt as percentage of GDP witnessed a sharp increase post 2012. FDI into the country has also plummeted over the last few years. It fell to $540 million in 2020 as compared to $793 million in 2019 and $1.6 billion in 2018. Tourism plays an important role in Sri Lanka's economy. Tourism alone contributes more than 10% to Sri Lanka's GDP. Tourism took a hit after the 2019 serial bombings in Colombo on the day of Easter, in which 269 people died, including 45 foreign nationals. The COVID-19 pandemic made the situation worse. As a result, the Sri Lankan rupee depreciated a lot, thereby putting more pressure on country's foreign currency reserves. As the country was grappling with the COVID-19 pandemic and rapidly increasing debt burden, in April 2021, the government announced the bizarre decision to completely ban chemical fertilizers, intending to switch to 100% organic farming. It is said that an Indian environmentalist, Vandana Shiva, had a crucial role to play in this decision. The thought behind this decision was to reduce import of chemical fertilizers and save foreign currency, and also cut back on fertilizer subsidies to reduce government spendings. Unfortunately, experts and farmers were not consulted before this decision, nor was adequate time provided to make this switch. There is nothing wrong in traditional ways of farming, but the abrupt decision without proper planning turned out to be disastrous, as it was an untested theory and productivity was not taken into account. Agricultural output reduced significantly. According to reports, paddy, maize, tea output reduced by around 40 to 50%, which caused food shortage in the country. After protests from the farmers, the ban had to be revoked in November last year, but the damage was already done. Estimates suggest drop in tea production alone resulted in economic losses of around $425 million. Moreover, government had to import more food grains to meet the domestic demand, and also had to announce an economic package worth $200 million for the losses incurred by the farmers. So ultimately, government had to spend much more than what it had planned to save. Another decision that turned out to be disastrous was the decision to cut taxes. After winning the presidential elections in 2019, Gotabaya Rajapaksa announced the populist decision to cut taxes. The cabinet cut the value-added tax from 15% to 8% and abolished another 7 taxes, including a 2% nation-building tax paid by businesses. It caused reduction in revenue and a credit rating downgrade in 2020. Sri Lanka currently has a severe debt crisis. Sri Lanka's external debt stands at around $51 billion. Before announcing default on loans, it had to pay around $8.6 billion worth of debt in 2022, including a $1 billion international sovereign bond maturing in July. However, Sri Lanka's debt crisis has very clear Chinese footprints. Mahinda Rajapaksa, as the president of Sri Lanka between 2005 to 15, was charmed by China's benevolence. Sri Lanka built the Hambantota port with Chinese monetary assistance as part of the Belt and Road Initiative, but could not repay the loans and finally was forced to give the port to China as a 99-year lease in 2017 for loan repayment relief. There have been many such white elephant projects touted as flagship projects with huge economic costs and very few financial benefits. But for years, Sri Lanka has been borrowing recklessly to fund these projects, and most of these projects are Chinese funded. Another such project is the Colombo Port City project. Sri Lanka wants to develop a high-tech city that will host international financial centers, luxurious residential and commercial spaces, and a marina on the lines of Dubai, Monaco or Singapore. The Chinese state-run firm CHEC has created 269 hectares of land with reclaimed sand from the sea. For this, the CHEC has invested around $1.4 billion and in return has gotten 43% of the land on a 99-year lease. The project has now faced financial hurdles due to lack of investors. It isn't expected to finish before 2040, and there are increasing fears that the project's fate might go the way of Hambantota port. Sri Lanka had signed an MOU with Japan and India in May 2019 during the tenure of President Sirisena to jointly develop the East Container Terminal of the Colombo port. But when the Rajapaksas came to power, the deal was scrapped in 2021 and was again awarded to the Chinese state-run firm CHEC. As compensation, development of the West Container Terminal was awarded to the Indian company Adani Group. There are also serious concerns over the financial viability of these projects, like the Hambantota Port project. There have been multiple red flags and warning signs issued by the IMF and other international agencies with regards to the debt situation of Sri Lanka, but clearly these reports have been overlooked. Most recently, IMF released a staff report on 25th February 2022. The report states, based on staff analysis, the fiscal consolidation necessary to bring debt down to safe levels would require excessive adjustment over the coming years, pointing to a clear solvency problem. The report categorically states that Sri Lanka's balance of payment and debt problems could turn into a crisis, based on their discussions with Sri Lankan officials. So what the reports pointed out turned out to be true sooner than expected. But what's next for Sri Lanka? The Sri Lankan government has approached the International Monetary Fund seeking assistance in designing an economic recovery program and for emergency financial assistance. If a financial package is announced, there is going to be very high level of scrutiny with respect to spendings and debt repayments. There is no easy way out of this crisis. A Sri Lankan delegation led by the newly appointed Finance Minister Ali Sabri is headed to Washington this week, hoping to secure $4 billion from the IMF and other lenders to help the country pay for food and fuel imports and also limit debt defaults. In the meanwhile, Sri Lanka needs funds to keep its economy afloat. According to some reports, Sri Lanka has asked India to provide bridging finance till the IMF provides adequate funds, which may take another 3 to 4 months. Indian Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has held several rounds of discussions with her Lankan counterpart and the Sri Lankan High Commissioner. It is important to remember that since January this year, India has already provided a $500 million line of credit for fuel purchase and a $2.5 billion line of credit for buying food and other essential commodities. Multiple ships of rice grains, fuel and other essentials have been delivered to Sri Lanka out of this line of credit. India is also considering another $2 billion line of credit to Sri Lanka. At least 39 Sri Lankan Tamils are reported to have fled the country and reached the coast of Tamil Nadu. A prolonged crisis in Sri Lanka may cause a migration problem for India. At this point, India needs to handhold Sri Lanka out of this crisis. Chinese-owned ports and other infrastructure in Sri Lanka are not good signs for India. A bankrupt Sri Lanka in the debt trap of China, with China controlling critical infrastructure which may be used for military purposes against India, would be a huge strategic challenge. India could not prevent Hambantota, but now there is an opportunity to regain control in the region. Sri Lanka is important for India's Indo-Pacific strategy, and also there are cultural and historical ties with the people of Sri Lanka. India must do what's necessary to help Sri Lanka out of this crisis. Thanks for watching. Please like, share and subscribe my channel. I hope to see you soon with a fresh and new video. Thank you.